Of course, I have amplification. Well, I've been told that we are live. So, good morning. How you doing? My name is Norm Ellis. This is Grace Baptist Church, and I'm the Adult One Bible Study teacher. Glad you're with us today as people start to filter into the auditorium, and those of you who are online right now. Today, we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 1. Yes, that's right, Daniel. I didn't misspeak. We are now out of Ezekiel, and we're in the book of Daniel. And so we'll be talking a little bit about what the book of Daniel is and everything. And our title today is Integrity Established. Integrity Established. And we're going to be looking at verses 8 through 21. And so if you have your Bible ready, that's where you want to be looking at. And we're going to be looking in the lesson book. If you have your lesson book, you can look at session number 8 today. And it starts on page 73 and goes through page 81. Let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the opportunity it is to read your word, to learn these principles that many, many years ago were laid out, and they're applicable to us today. I just pray that you'd help us to see how in our own lives, integrity of our life matters a lot in many ways. Thank you so much for all you've done. Be with those that are on their way here to church. Keep them safe. Watch over those that are at home. Be with those that are sick. Be with those that have lost loved ones. Thank you for all you've done and how you've blessed us in your Son's precious name. Amen. So our main idea today is that believers, Christians, can live with integrity when tempted to compromise. Compromise. What does that mean? When you hear the word compromise, what does it bring up, conjure in your head? Maybe give and take, perhaps, right? Maybe, well, you give a little, I'll give a little, we'll compromise somewhere in the middle, right? And that is a meaning of that word. Another word, though, to me is in the area of maintenance. When I worked on aircraft, when we had corrosion, let's say on a bolt, that bolt was compromised. The integrity of that bolt could not be trusted, so it could fail. And so that, to me, that conjures up the word compromise as well, something that can cause devastating problems. And I think we see that in the way that this is used today as well. We're going to be looking at these 3 points in our lesson today. And like I said, it begins in Daniel chapter 1. And verses 8 through 10, it's going to be a commitment expressed. And 11 through 16 is a test passed. And the third one is 17 through 21. It's a recognized difference, So this should be an interesting study. Daniel is a pretty interesting book. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. But to bring us into our study, how many of you have heard of the Great Wall of China before? Supposedly, it's one of the few things you can see from outer space. I don't know if that's true. Well, anyway, in the introduction, I think it's also in the book, people in ancient China, they wanted security from people to their north. So they built a great wall. Now, this wall was not just for security. It was also to unify the country. It was also a political statement. So there's a lot of reasons for that wall. But anyway, according to legend, now we don't know this for a fact, according to legend, invaders, they couldn't make it in. So rather than climbing and destroying or going around the wall, what they did is they bribed one of the gatekeepers, and they went right through the gate. So the integrity of this wall was compromised by the integrity of a gatekeeper, one single gatekeeper. Now, if this is true or not, I don't know. It would make sense because you could see somebody being swayed by a large sum of money in this way, right? Well, anyway, Daniel learned early in his life that spiritual integrity could withstand any challenge. Any challenge. Now, that's a bold statement. Sometimes in our life, we have challenges that we wonder if we're going to break. And sometimes we do, don't we? Those challenges in life that sometimes tax us beyond what we think we can handle. But we think we have it really tough. But have you ever been torn out of your country? Torn from your family? Sent to a foreign land that you didn't understand what they were saying, perhaps? A culture that did not make any sense. Everything's turned upside down. Well, that's what happened to Daniel and his friends. So we're going to look at a little bit about how that related to their life and what they had to do as people of faith. So, question for you. What commitments are the most difficult to keep? What do you think about that? Anybody here have an answer to that one? Oh, a commitment to get up on time and get to church. Well, I'm just joking. Yeah, when you're really tired, the commitment to actually get up and do something that you're supposed to do. Right. I agree. That's a very difficult one. What's another one? Anybody else? What's another hard commitment sometimes to keep for people? Diet. Oh, that's what we're talking about. This time of year with New Year's resolutions. Somebody just mentioned diets can be real hard to keep. Real hard. Why is that? Why is diets hard to keep? So the dark temptations of life, like chocolate. There's a lot of things though like that, right? There's a lot of things that can maybe take us away from doing that commitment, that thing that is right. What makes keeping a commitment so challenging? How about consistency, being consistent? That's a hard thing to do, isn't it? I think that's a hard thing to do. Also, a challenging aspect would be maybe what's important to you. Maybe it's not important for you to get that report in on time like your boss wants because he's got a few days leeway. I don't know. Sometimes things like that, right? Anything else come to mind in that area? Selfishness. Yeah, selfishness. That's a big one, isn't it? I think that's the core of a lot of our problems that way. So, another question asked is, how does keeping our commitments define our integrity? Ooh, there's a thought-provoking question. Let me read the question again. How does keeping our commitments define our integrity? Integrity. What do you think about that? First, we probably ought to define integrity. What do you think? Oh, all right. So let's look at some of the characteristics of integrity. What would be some of the characteristics do you think that you should have if you were a person of integrity? Doing the right thing, even if no one knows. Now, I can't remember if it's integrity or one of these other kind of words, but that's supposedly like one of the definitions. When no one else is around, are you doing the right things? If you are, you're a person of integrity, right? I've heard something like that before. But that might be applying it to some other word. I'm not sure. Do you remember? Anybody else? Sounds good. We'd have to Google that one, I think. Anything else? What other characteristics of integrity come to mind? Okay. So what you say is what you do. You're a person of word. What you say is what you're going to do. Okay. I like that. Anything else? Well, integrity is one of those words that sometimes we know and sometimes we just think we know what it means. And sort of to clarify it, on page 2 of handout number 1 at the bottom, I hit it there so you wouldn't see it right off the bat. I have a definition of integrity. So if you do have the copy of our handouts, and if you want a copy of our handouts, make sure you contact us and let us know. We'll add you to our email list. But integrity is that quality of being honest, of having strong moral principles, moral uprightness, a firm adherence to a code of especially moral or maybe sometimes artistic values. Incorruptibility is another word there. A life characterized by moral soundness. Associated words would be trustworthiness, truthfulness, scrupulous, reputable, sincere in what you do, uprightness, principled, and virtuous. Now, is this an exhaustive definition? No. But it gives us an idea, right? A couple verses come to mind here. Proverbs 10:9 says, "He who walks in integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will be found out." And Psalms 119, verse 1 says, "Joyful are people of integrity who follow the instructions of the Lord." Why would you be joyful if you were persons of integrity? What do you think? You don't have to worry. Yeah, you'd relax because what you said is what you did, right? You have confidence in the fact that you did the right thing. right? You didn't do it for ulterior motives or anything like that, but you did the right thing. So that's what integrity is related to. Hope that helps a little bit clear up that term. Let's go back to our lesson plan here. Let's see, where was I in my thought process? Says the main idea for our study today is that believers can live with integrity when tempted to compromise. So we talked about some of these characteristics, right? So integrity goes deeper than our words. Integrity means having strong values and living by them through every circumstance. Through studying the book of Daniel, we're going to learn from a man with integrity who could withstand any challenge. I talked about that already. So, who was Daniel? Who was Daniel? That's a good question. Again, I'll have to turn to my handouts. On page 3 of handout number 1, I made a little point paper here on who Daniel was and about the book of Daniel, of course, because you can't divorce those two. They're one and the same, essentially, when you talk about Daniel, right? So the book of Daniel, it contains 12 chapters and 357 verses. And most biblical scholars believe the book was completed by 530 BC and is made up of primarily apocalyptic and historical narrative material. Most classify it as apocalyptic literature. Now, that's a big $10 word. What do we mean by that? What's apocalyptic literature? Well, apocalyptic is characterized a lot by the words prophecy and another big $10 word, eschatology. Study of the end times. That's what that means. So when you see apocalyptic, think prophecy and end time study. That's what we're talking about, right? In the true sense of a prophet, saying this is what's going to happen in the future, right? Daniel himself, he was taken into captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar's forces in the first exile. When King Nebuchadnezzar took over Jerusalem and they sacked the temple. And they took out all the gold and silver out of the temple. They also took out something else. They took out the best that Israel had. They picked out the best young men and women, and they took them out of the country. And they took them away into captivity. And they did this primarily with the young people. So when you do that to a country, what's going to happen to that country? Think about that. It's like pulling the heart of the country, isn't it? That'd be a terrible thing to do. And they say that he was, well, the Bible says that he was a youth. Now, it doesn't define youth, but most people think that he was probably between 11 and 14. When you're 12 in the Jewish culture, you are a man. Now, we all know 12-year-old people are not really going to have characteristics of somebody who's 21. But that was the way they classified him. And they wanted these people who were young so they could do what with them? Yeah, reprogram them, mold them into be good Babylonian servants. What was that? Well, I'm not going to say that. Anyway, even though it might be true. Anyway, so now you made me lose my place. Okay, but there's something else important they did with Daniel. And by the way, his 3 friends, he had 3 very good friends that they had, and they renamed him. They took his name Daniel, and they tossed it aside and gave him the name of Belshazzar or something like that. And why would you do that? Why would you change a person's name? That was a very common thing, by the way, in the Old Testament. It was part of the programming. Exactly right. His captors, as a probable effort to force assimilation into the Babylonian culture, would change the names of people from their Jewish names. That's exactly right. It would change them, right? It would make them no longer good Jewish people, make them now Babylonian people, right? So they could serve the king. Exactly. So as a teenager, they're young and they're malleable, and you see that a lot of times when kids go away to, I don't know, whatever it might be, college or sometimes the military, and they come back. Are they the same? They're different. Yeah, they're different. Sometimes different in a bad way, sometimes different in good ways. Anyway, so they knew that. So that's why they took these young people out. He had 3 important friends, like I mentioned before, also from Israel: Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, Azariah Azariah is a common name, and it was the name also, I think, of a king, and it's also the name of a grandchild and a priest. My grandson is named Azariah. Anyway, so Daniel was not a prophet in the same way that Isaiah or Jeremiah was. We do not see him using the normal prophetic words such as, "Thus says the Lord." You don't hear that in Daniel. He is considered as a prophet more in the general sense like Abraham or Moses was. The Holman Bible Dictionary describes the book of Daniel as follows. The book of Daniel has high hopes and great expectations. Is that a good thing? Sure is for people in exile. Oh boy, it sure is, isn't it? It combines the characteristics of prophecy, wisdom, and apocalyptic, easy for you to say, writing in a unique type of literature. Matthew identifies Daniel as a prophet in Matthew 24:15. The book addresses a current situation of Israel in exile with a call for moral uprightness, and it also points to hope for the future, rising out of God's words and promises. And that's a good thing. They needed that. As did other wisdom writers in the Bible, and he's considered also a wisdom writer, Daniel served in a royal court, counseling a ruler, a very important ruler, the ruler of the known world. That's interesting. How did he get into that position? We're going to talk a little bit about that. He was very intelligent and highly educated. Daniel primarily used two languages we see, Aramaic and Hebrew. Throughout the 12 chapters of the book of Daniel, we see a common theme: the encouragement to remain faithful to God even during very difficult times, as he is sovereign over all mankind. And that's a real important thing to remember about Daniel, is there they are, separated from their country, their countrymen, right? And conceivably their God and the temple. They're torn out and they're thrown into this pagan culture, right? Are they forgotten by God? No, they're not. Because God is God of all. Not a regional God like the thought processes were for most people there. He is God of all. And that's what's stressed throughout Daniel, is that even though they're in Babylon, God's still in charge. And he would tell Nebuchadnezzar that too, by the way. And that's Daniel was a very courageous man, among other attributes. So, got an idea who Daniel was. I hope I covered most of that. I think most of the questions on that score. Going on here, where are we in our text? Okay. I don't know where I am. I've lost my place. Oh, here it is. I introduced the book of Daniel. Right. If you want to know, as far as the outline of Daniel, there is a handout for that you do not have. We ran into a problem with our copier, and so I decided not to put all these things because I was running my own paper and my own ink. But if you want to see it, and you have a lesson book, if you go to page 9, I believe, there is the same material. How about that? And we are at page 9. For the book of Daniel. So we're under the first point there. It says, the godly remnant in the times of the Gentiles. So that's what we're going to be looking at. And later on, we may refer to a map. And there is a map also. It's on the inside back cover of the lesson book as well. So I didn't give you a copy of the map. Sorry. So anyway, the main thing to remember is that the Israelites were taken to captivity from Israel, where they lived, where they grew up, where they had all their friends, all their family, and they're snatched away into captivity into the land of Babylon. So let's go on as I look at our first point here. And by the way, we should have a slide showing you here a little bit that goes along with these first couple points. First one is a commitment expressed, and we're going to look in Daniel verses 1, 8 through 10. And you know what? Before we do that, I'm going to read, to keep it in context, 1 through 7, okay? And we may refer back to these later on, these verses, I think. But before we get to that first point, so hold on, whoever has that first one. It says, in the verses 1 through 7, it says, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, Nebuchadnezzar's God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of that God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some from the royal family and of the nobles, the youths in which there was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had the ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered them to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, choice wine. And appointed that they should be educated 3 years, and at the end of which they were to enter into the king's personal service. Now among them were the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them. And to Daniel he assigned the name of Belshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. We see what happened to these guys, right? And they by the way, they also did it for other reasons too. They pulled these youths out of the countries that they took over to also bolster their own country. Because the theory was, we need new blood. We need new ideas and thoughts. We need fresh people in to help us maintain our country and to expand our country. And so that was one of the reasons they did that as well. And it was actually a smart idea to do that for them. But it was also God's plan. God's plan was to have those people in those places for a reason. And we see what happens later with Daniel. So in these first few verses, I want you to notice Daniel's resolve as a young man. He's probably, like I said, 11, 12, 13 years old. Yet he had this resolve because he had been taught, by the way, probably as a young child on up to this age. He had been taught the Old Testament, the first 5 books, the Pentateuch. Is that the correct name? And so he knew what he was supposed to be doing as a good Jew. And so he had this in his mind. His parents made sure of that. And we see that reflected later on in his life. So I want you to notice Daniel's resolve and what it was founded on. Let's look at the first verse, Daniel 1:8 first, and then we'll do the rest of them after that. Who's got that first one? I see that hand. Go for it.
However, Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself.
Okay, so by the way, it was not just him. It was, I think, his friends as well. But he was the leader. He was a ringleader of this group. And what was the whole purpose of Daniel's resolve? Now, resolve is another interesting word. He made up his mind, it says. He decided this is what he will do. Now, think about the maturity level of this kid to say that I'm going to take this stand in front of the king of a whole new place where I was taken captive to, who has the choice of what? Life and death over me. Don't think about that. Think about the kind of personality that would take to do that. We talked about that earlier in verses 1 through 7, what was required of them. So it was God's plan, we see, to place Daniel and his friends in these key roles during the exile in Babylon, and God knew Daniel would be true to his beliefs and make wise decisions. We're going to see what he's going to do here. So the question asked is, what is the value of a carefully thought out set of beliefs? So it says he made up his mind. That means it wasn't a spur of the moment thing, folks. He considered it. He realized what they were saying. They wanted him to do something. What did they want him to do to his body, to his mind and everything else? There's a word in here that talks about that here, I think. Compromise or defile in this particular translation. Yes, they wanted him to defile himself, to compromise, and to follow along with what they do there. And in certain things, it probably wouldn't have been a big deal. But in this one area, he knew what he was supposed to do as a good Jew, right? What was he supposed to do with this in case of his diet? Keep himself what? This was to reflect what? Why was it just a health thing? That's what some people like to say, by the way. Wasn't just a health thing, was it? Health and holiness. Yes. Right. Obeying what God said. Yeah. Right. We're going to pass. Now, think about this. These people have the power of life and death. Okay? And the picture kind of shows the guy bringing them this food, and this food that was unclean. It was things that he was told, you are to be separate to me. You are to be holy to me as a people. And part of the sign of this is you will be only eating certain things that I have told you are also clean and separate. To keep yourself clean and separate, clean and holy to me. And so it was a symbol, but it was something they would take into life and make it part of their lifestyle. Okay? We do that kind of thing today with our groups of people. Maybe it's smoke cigarettes because everybody else is smoking, whatever. We want to be part of that group, right? We identify. Well, this is something that identified the Jewish people. They were particular people. And this is a reason. The reason was to be holy to God. And so that's why I had these certain kinds of foods that were prohibited. And this was the kind of foods that they tried to feed these young men. We see on our screen, right? And I don't think this picture is exactly right. They're showing a little older kids than they probably were, but I don't know. We don't really know. And anyway, so God's plan was for them to make this stand, and Daniel was the person to do it, and he did it. He was the leader of this particular group. And so they're going to have these key roles later on, as we see. Why is explaining the beliefs behind our actions so important, though? Because he said something here. He told this commander, he says, he sought permission so that he might not defile himself. So it wasn't just, I don't want to eat it, but I don't want to eat it because. He explained, this is the reason why. Because this would compromise me before my God. This is what they're saying here, is he was explaining, because to defile himself, that's what that's meaning. So he was explaining this to him. Does that make a difference to people, other people maybe? It might. It might say, wow, that guy's a person of principle. He's standing up for something. It's laudable. It may not be what I am going to allow, but it's laudable, right? Because we're going to see this little discussion here coming up. Anyway, so is it important? Yes, I think it is important to explain why we are taking that stand. Why it's important for us for different things in our life. Go ahead. Exactly. He's standing on principle. He doesn't just want his own way. Exactly right. It's not a selfish thing. Matter of fact, it's the opposite of a selfish thing. I mean, if it was selfish, I want to preserve my life. I'll do, whatever you say, I'll do it. He's not doing it for selfish reasons at all. Exactly right. So Daniel 1:8 is our memory verse. Actually, the first half is our memory verse today. It's a good memory verse to remember because we need to make up our minds daily to follow God, don't we? And not forget that that's our principle to stand on, that we want to follow God and be more like him, be more like Christ. What can keep a person, though, from establishing a set of beliefs that impacts how they live? What can maybe keep us from doing that? Temptations. Oh, we talked about that dark temptation of chocolate when it comes to diets. But what are some other things? You don't want to be singled out by standing up and being the only person there, right? Yeah. When I was in basic training, I sort of watched what was going on around me, and I realized I'm going to be a wallflower here. I'm not going to stand out at all because I want to get through this next 6 weeks. And so it was kind of funny. At the end of the 6 weeks, almost, one of the drill sergeants said, "Are you part of our flight?" I says, "Yeah." "Oh, okay." So I was successful, I guess. Anyway, but that was we want to make sure, though, when it comes to push comes to shove, that we're standing on God's side, and we're not afraid to do so, right? And Daniel was one of those kind of people. He had resolved to do it. He made up his mind to do it. He would not be defiled by this rich food that was really considered a blessing from the gods in that culture, but was exactly opposite of what he should be doing to follow his God. Anyway, so how can the... No, I didn't want to. What's that? Yeah, I'm getting that right now, as a matter of fact. That was just talking about verse 8 first. For the rest of these verses, note God's hand in establishing a favorable relationship with the chief eunuch, Ashpenaz. I probably butchered his name. Sorry about that, wherever you are. Let's see what he says in these rest of these verses. Note God's hand in establishing this favorable relationship with this man. And we're going to go ahead and read verses 9 and 10 now.
So, Norm, are you telling us that you were like Major and Catch-22? He didn't want to stand out either.
Oh, you're talking about basic training. Well, yeah, we'll talk about that more later. Go ahead.
So now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord, the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit, killed, dead, my head to the king.
Wow. So we see some interesting things happen with this Ashpenaz guy, right? Because it says God granted Daniel favor and compassion. So was this really Ashpenaz's views, or was God had his hand in this situation? Yes, it was. Yes. But his inclination would have been probably, no, you cannot do that. I have my orders from the king. But God caused him, because God is in control of all things, folks, God caused him to have favor towards Daniel and have compassion on his view, right? He was still afraid, and he still hadn't been convinced yet, but we see that God is at work. That's the important thing to see here. God is at work. Because otherwise you'd say, no, you just do it or you're out of here. This is your one chance, guys. I mean, you're not going to get a second chance, right? But he had some fears. And this is an interesting thing. Why would do you think we would go beyond this little part here of Ashpenaz just saying, yeah, okay, yes, go ahead and do what you want to do? That's right. And that was his fear, right? But this would also further amplify that it was God's doing, because we're going to see what happens in this test here. This is quite an interesting part coming up, by the way. I can hardly wait. Anyway, so in these verses here that we just read, see that this is first of many occasions where Daniel was equipped by God to address a challenging situation while he was in captivity. So this is like training wheels for Daniel, because this is like the first experience now, the first test. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? You know, it's an interesting thing to see here. So anyway, I have a statement here. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? As believers, we should be able to explain our reasons for holy living when asked to compromise. It's going to take courage, folks. That's not an easy thing to do, is it? Not an easy thing sometimes. We don't want to be that person who stands out. You know, we want to be in that wallflower person. We don't want to be the standing up person everybody looks at, because that person takes the arrows. He's the first person, right? But sometimes God wants you to be that person. There's a reason for that. We're going to see Daniel was that person. He was standing up, right? Okay, let's go on to our next part here. All right, good. Let's look at the next step in our study today. And the next one is a test passed. A test passed. And it's Daniel 1, chapter 1, verses 11 through 16. For these next 6 verses, I want you to listen closely to the test proposed by Daniel. Because Daniel is sensitive to what's going on. Remember, he's a smart, intelligent young man. And he realizes that he has to use tact. He has to use reason. He has to bring this person to his side on this to understand where he's coming from. And this is very, very interesting to see. So let's watch read these verses and listen about this. Who's got that one for me? Okay, go ahead, Ron.
Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this test and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead.
So what, in these verses here, what were the terms of the test that we see? What are the terms of the test? Okay, there's a limited number of days, yeah. 10 days, by the way. Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. You're stealing my thunder again. What else? 10 days. Comparison between this group here and a control group. Yeah, right. These three and the rest of them. Okay, what else do we see? Change in diet, right? That's a term of the test, right? They're going to be doing a certain thing, right? And I think somebody already mentioned it, but they're going to be graded, or they're going to be, what's that? Compared, yeah, at a certain point. You think there might be some pressure here? A little bit of wondering, oh boy, 10 days? Yes. Right, exactly right. Think about what that's doing, by the way. Is that building support? Is that building support for Daniel and his friends in that court? Oh, it is big time. That's why I said, God could have probably just said, ask for an ask, you're just going to let him do it, right? He could have changed his mind. He's sovereign, right? But he allowed this to go to a certain extent for a reason. It's building the support that Daniel, we see later, is going to really need as he comes up from just being a person that's then been taken captive to being a person that's a trusted confidant, a trusted, maybe second in charge of the kingdom in a sense. Right. Yeah, he's thoughtful. Yes, he's a person of wisdom. He's thoughtful. He's understanding what God is leading him towards. Right. Anyway, so we see that have this test, and like you guys did really good on the test of what it was, and basically instead of eating the meat, he was going to be eating vegetables. Now a lot of people will claim this is a vegan diet, and so that's why vegan diets are so much more superior. No, the reason why was because the vegetables were obviously clean. Whereas the meat, they don't know. They don't know how it's prepared, where it came from, what the deal was. In many cases, a lot of times, this kind of meat had been sacrificed to idols, perhaps. It was the best food they had, and so they would then eat it afterwards. We see that in, I think it's Corinthians, I think, where Paul is talking to the Corinthian church about the discussion about whether we should eat meat or not that was sacrificed to idols. But regardless, the one thing they did know is the vegetables were clean. So that's why, if you look, there's certain dietary stipulations, and I didn't go through them before, but in the commentary it talks a little bit about that for food. It couldn't be pork, for instance. It couldn't be horse meat. It had to be, what's that? No, certain kinds of fish and stuff were not allowed. It also, the like lamb and different things like that were allowed, they had to be done in the correct manner. All the blood had to be drained out of them in a certain prescribed manner. There's all kinds of things that had to be done. And so did Daniel know that this meat had been done that way? No. So in this particular case, this was why Daniel resolved to not touch that meat. And the same thing for other foods as well, like the wine and things like that. So we see one of the provisions of the test was 10 days. I got a question for you. In 10 days, do you think you would see noticeable change? I mean, real noticeable change in a person just because of a change in diet like this? You might see a change. but probably not, okay? And yet in 10 days, there was a noticeable difference. Now, they appeared to be, their appearance was healthier. And one of the ways they describe that is, I think it's in these verses, they appeared to be fatter. Now, we think of fat as being unhealthy, but back then, most people did not have very much fat. Matter of fact, they were looking like, not very healthy at all. But those who did have a little bit of weight on their frame were considered blessed. They were considered better. They were considered a higher class. All that stuff was good to have that. That kind of appearance was not detrimental like we think of it today. And it wasn't obese we're talking about. We're talking about just a healthy appearance. So in 10 days of this restrictive diet, there was a change. A change, which was amazing. How come you think there was? Yes, could be. Yeah. There could be a lot of those things too, right? But I don't think we should also put aside the hand of God in this too. God allowed them to either actually be better looking in those 10 days or to appear to be better looking to Ashpenaz, right? In any case, he was convinced at that point. And in 10 days, like I said, is not a very long time. It goes on to say about that here. It says, for a distinction to appear between these two groups was really remarkable. Daniel knew that he would need God's blessing in this test, yet he took a step of faith because he was determined to maintain his integrity, even on a smaller issue like maintaining the Hebrew dietary laws. It goes on to say also that the guard knew the reason why he was doing this. Remember, he told them at the very beginning. Why was it? To honor God, right? Follow those dietary rules, which is part of that honoring of his God. Daniel and his friends wanted to honor their God. Even if the test had failed, Daniel and his friends would have provided a witness to this man of their faith in God Almighty. So at the end of the 10 days, they examined him, and they looked healthier and better nourished than all the other young men who had ate that royal food instead. So that expression, they looked healthier or better nourished, literally reads, their appearance was better and they were fatter of flesh. Daniel's test had proved successful. You could also say successful because of God, right? So they were, and he had real fear. He had a real fear that his head would be removed from his body if these men were sickly looking when they went to see the king, right? And it turned out that wasn't an issue at all. Anyway, so at the end of 10 days, like I said, they did look good. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and wine they were to drink and gave them instead vegetables and water. So this test was passed. What do you think that did for Ashpenaz? And also for those, I'm sure this wasn't done in a vacuum. I'm sure other people observed this and saw what was going on. What do you think it did for them? It amazed them. I'm sure it did. Yeah. What else could it have done? Convince them of certain things? Their God is with them even here in Babylon, which was not what they thought. They thought gods were regional. So this was something that would probably astounded them because they didn't expect this to happen, folks. They did not expect this to happen. They expected, they'll be sickly because they're not getting the best foods. We all know this is the best foods because the king's table. The king eats his food. It's the best food. So these guys are not going to pass. What? They look better? They did pass? Wow. I think I'd be amazed if I was him too. So how does a test of a person's faith strengthen that faith? Do you think Daniel's faith was strengthened as well, by the way? I forgot to talk about that. I meant to talk about it. That. You think it was? Yeah. Imagine seeing that happen, being part of that thing, that suddenly it's changed in the way that God determined it. Do you think it strengthened Daniel and his friends? Yes, it did. Yes, it did. That's a good point, too, and I meant to bring that up. Thank you very much, Ron. The other Israelites, the other exiles, this was probably one of the main things that we see is these people were looked up to. They were the cream of the crop, okay? And so the others who were taken to exile, by the way, there were others who were taken just because they were useful as servants and stuff like that. They looked up to these young men that were in the royal court. They were picked out special. And they saw their example, and they were heartened and encouraged. You can bet they were. Exactly right. Thank you for bringing that up. So, what results do we enjoy because of a tested faith? Similar ones, don't we? Are we heartened? Are we encouraged in our lives? Sure are. Are we lifted up in our spirit? The results were that Daniel and his friends' appearances were much better than the others. Not just a little bit, not just a smidgen, but much better, it says, than the others, because they were in better shape than all the others who ate the king's food. They were then allowed to continue their new diet, which gave honor and glory to God. So all this stuff, folks, was not done in a vacuum. We know about it because we read it here, right? It doesn't say it was necessarily a secret. So I think it was an open secret, if you want to call it that. Everyone knew that these guys are not doing the same thing as us. And look how much better they're doing. So that was a recognition of God. They were honoring God, and they were being blessed because of it. So let's look at the last step, a recognized difference. Okay, these last 5 verses, I want you to note God's gift of faithfulness. God's gift of faithfulness. Go ahead and read number 3 for me. Who has number 3?
To these 4 young men God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus.
So when that's interesting. It says Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Cyrus was at the end of Daniel's service. So they're kind of encapsulating. By the way, it was 70 years that Daniel lived. So did he have an impact in Babylon? He did. And we're going to see some of it as we talk about these things in the future here. Unfortunately, we can't go into as much stuff as we want to. But there'll be some interesting things in our next lesson and the one after that. So it says for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them a little bit better than the rest of them. No. 10 times better. 10 times better. Can you imagine getting 10 times better gas mileage in your car right now? Would that be good? Yeah. Or getting 10 times more pay in your paycheck. Would that be good? Ron, what do you think about that? Oh, yeah, that'd be very good. But 10 times, that's quite a bit. That's quite a bit. And so, in other words, they were saying it was very apparent. You look at them, you can see it. You can hear it from their voices, with the things they said. It was common knowledge that these people were so much higher than the other ones. Do you think there might have been some jealousy among the established people in the court? Probably was. We're going to see there really was later on. And what I like is God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. So remember, when they went into captivity, Nebuchadnezzar didn't just take the people. He also took stuff out of the temple. And he also took people, I think that one of the prophets came, Ezekiel later did, and others, and they took probably whatever they could that they thought was of value. Babylon was known at that time as a place where wisdom could be acquired. You go there to find things out, okay? And so they theorized that there's some of the books from the temple, like the scrolls and stuff, probably went as well. And now, we don't know for sure, but this talks about this here. It talks about how God further blessed their work and related to all kinds of these literature and learning. Archaeologists have discovered many examples of ancient Babylon literature. One text describes Babylonian understanding the creation of the world. Also, another describes a great flood that came upon the earth. Babylonian literature also includes a story about a very righteous man who suffered. Sounds familiar? You say Book of Job? The Judean exiles studied these works and others so they could better understand the culture they now lived. So a lot of people theorize that a lot of this stuff that they later found that Babylonians knew about probably came from Israel. So we see how this is impacting the whole culture of Babylon. It's quite an interesting thing to see. So anyway, gave them this knowledge, and it says a special thing that Daniel got. What was a special thing that Daniel got? Knowledge and wisdom. There was something else. He understood something. Yes. He was given a special ability to understand all kinds of visions and dreams. Now, this is, they believe that happened after this event of the first test of Daniel and his friends when they came in. That at that point, then God gave them this additional. Now, we don't know if for a fact it was not until then, but it leads you and infers you that that's when it happened. So God was blessing them, is what I'm getting at. God was blessing them to be able to do these things. Now I got to close up. A little late here, I noticed. So he talked with them, and they entered into the king's regular service. No. What do they enter into? The king's personal service. You understand what that means? That's not just the court. That's the inner groups, the inside groups that you don't get there right away until you've spent enough time. Just like a regular job, you can't be the vice president when you first join. You have to go through the mailroom and all those other places, right? There they are, right there, fast track. Do you think God's hand was upon him? So Daniel was this man who had integrity, and he decided to stand up for what God wanted him to do in this land that he was torn out of and into another place, right? Let's look at our conclusion here of this. Does God place tests in our own lives to prepare us, do you think, for future assignments from him? He does, doesn't he? I can think of many examples in my own life where different things had happened, and I realized if I had done a certain thing differently, I would be a different person today. And thank God I didn't do the certain things. We see that in our lives, don't we? Let's look at our summary of this, and there's 3 summary points I want to touch on. First is that Christians should explain their reasons for holy living when asked to compromise. If somebody asks you to compromise, don't just say no, but say why you're taking that stand. Because God doesn't want that in my life, right? Explain what that means to you. Do you think that'll cause them to maybe reflect on it? Yes, probably will. Christians who refuse, the second point, Christians who refuse to compromise God's standards will be vindicated. Sometimes it takes a while, but they will be vindicated. And the last point is Christians find knowledge and understanding when they trust God. And that's real important to remember. When we take those first steps of trust in God, he will give you additional knowledge and insight into things as you seek to know more about him, right? That's what I found in my life. The challenge from today's study is to consider what areas of our own life that we need God's wisdom in and what steps that we might need to take to trust God more fully in him. Because, folks, it's a matter of doing that. Did Daniel trust God? Completely. He knew God would be with him. And it's a hard thing, but he was that's another characteristic of him. He was courageous. We need that same courage, right? We need to remember that God is on our side. So what actions, a rhetorical question here, what actions can we take to help us to be that man or woman of integrity in this world? I want you to think about that man or woman of integrity that God wants. And what will that do in our own lives when we do that? That's an important question. We're going to close the word of prayer because it's now time for me to leave. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this book of Daniel and the quick look we're going to be having of this book, Lord. Thank you that we can see in this man something that we can emulate, the courage he had, the integrity he had to do that right thing that you wanted him to do, to be that man for him at that time. Lord, help us to be that man or woman for this time in our lives right now. Take those kind of stands, Lord. Lord, I just know that you will guide us and you'll strengthen us in all these things. Thank you for your faithfulness, and that daily that we can ask you for help in remaining faithful to you. Thank you in your son's name. Thank you for being with us today. This is Grace Baptist Church Adult One Bible Study.